Imagine one quiet night you're all alone and suddenly feel someone is present. All of your senses kick into high gear as you slowly turn your head. And through the dark, you make out another set of eyes staring right back into yours. And although they seem human, you can tell that something just isn't right. One story of someone like this is Zana of Abkhazia. Captured in a forest, Zana was kept in semi-captivity by a 19th century nobleman. No one knows where she came from, but she wasn't like any human that these people had ever seen. She was covered in hair, abnormally strong, could run faster than a horse, swim against a river current, never spoke any discernible human language, and liked to drink, apparently. Everything about her aligned with descriptions of other human-like sightings from around the world. But what exactly was this situation? Was she really just a misunderstood human or an entirely different creature? Were people just racist, or did they know something that we don't? What does Zana teach people, and who else is living amongst us that we have no idea about? Bigfoot or Sasquatch, a bipedal ape-like creature covered in either dark or reddish hair, often found in the Pacific Northwest. The abominable snowman or Yeti, a bipedal ape-like creature with dark gray or reddish hair, often found in the Himalayas. Hold on, y'all. I gotta read the list for this one. Almost, Anayu, Capcom, Mazeri, Otokachi, Nike, Adam, Skeets, Tatsi. These are all names by which a bipedal, ape-like, semi-human creature is known as in different languages in the Caucasus region. But what do all of these creatures have in common besides their appearance? It's that no substantial evidence has ever been discovered pertaining to their existence. However, reported encounters have all been the same amongst people who have never met. And although the Almas, or aka Almasty of the Caucasus, is not as sensationalized as Bigfoot or Yeti, it did cause quite a ruckus for Soviet researchers and people who actually lived in the area. With Eric Shipton's famous footprint picture taken on Mount Everest in 1951, Western media was set ablaze with the mysterious curiosity of the Yeti, and this did not go unnoticed by the Soviets. People in the USSR from all over began sending in letters to publishers and scientists about their own encounters with this creature. However, before the Yeti craze, any reports of this wasn't deemed all that serious or requiring further investigation by the researchers. Not until they reached Dr. Boris Porshnev, a revered Soviet historian and anthropologist. The volume, simplicity, and consistency of these reports piqued his interest. As he thoroughly reviewed these reports, the existence of this creature became less mythical and more plausible. And this was definitely a controversial idea to the prevailing Soviet scientific thought of the time. However, Dr. Porshnev had clout. He pushed for the study of the Almas's existence to be treated as a true zoological and anthropological study. In fact, he coined the term relict hominid to describe this field of research. Relict hominid simply refers to primate or archaic humans who were thought to be extinct but actually survived in isolated pockets around the world. One of his prevailing hypotheses was that Almasties were actually Neanderthals that had somehow survived. But clearly not everyone would take that hypothesis seriously. But some did. And one of these people was a respected French-Soviet doctor named Marie-Jeanne Kaufmann. And she was actually very interesting. You see, Dr. Kaufmann was a surgeon by trade and an alpiner other than trade. And actually, she served as an army captain and surgeon in the Soviet Red Army during World War II. She was the real deal. And through this myriad of experiences and with her mountaineering skills, she caught whiff of the Almasty. Well, not the actual Almasty. Although a number of people she interviewed actually reported that they were funky. But no, she heard talks brewing about this forest-dwelling creature possibly being real and actually attested to. But according to her, at the beginning, she was another skeptic. They were people of science and material evidence. If it wasn't proven, then it could not possibly be real. And if it challenged any prevailing thoughts in the scientific scientific community, then clearly it couldn't be real either. Especially the idea of a hairy, semi-ape, semi-human running around in the forests, having regular encounters with people. No. But Dr. Kaufman still listened in on all the hoopla, and eventually she decided she'd join in. Dr. Porshnev, spearheading this endeavor, managed to convince the Academy of Sciences in the USSR to officially sponsor an expedition to Pamir to solve the problem of the snowman. And Dr. Kaufman was a part of that expedition in 1958. However, it ended in failure. And critics, of course, were not going to let that slide. They leveraged that as proof that this endeavor was frivolous. But around 1958, 3 reputable sources were discovered to have witnessed this hairy, brutish, human-like creature in the Caucasus, all at different times. They were all unrelated and were not natives of the region. And this is when the honesty came into full view. But due to the lack of organizational support, Dr. Kaufman and other researchers had to figure out how to fund the research by themselves. She set out across the Caucasus as a skeptic, but became a believer that something was amiss out there. As she traversed the storied region, she collected over 500 reports from diverse people, all describing the same thing. Additionally, she came across material evidence in places where humans either didn't go or did not frequent whatsoever, but suggested that someone was there. These findings helped to further the idea that the wild man was actually based more in reality than in myth. But with no physical body, doubt remained up in the air. Or did it? Rumors floated on the wind of an untamed wild woman living in the sparsely inhabited forests near the village of Zana in Abkhazia in the mid-1800s. Besides simple hunters, villagers, and shepherds, no one had any real idea that something strange was going on out there. To the locals, it was normal, but to the outside world, they were mysteries waiting to be discovered. Upon request, hunters set out to capture this wild woman that was spoken about. And there are numerous accounts as to what actually occurred to make this happen. For example, one source claims that Zana was actually lured in by the scent of one of the hunters' pants, which he stripped off of him and left in an open area to entice her curiosity, which thus led to her capture. Another source claims that the hunters used tried and true methods of restraint to capture her. However it happened, the hunters caught this wild woman and were amazed by her appearance. She was big, had elongated mammary glands, and was covered in thick reddish hair across her whole entire body. She didn't speak with any discernible human language and was abnormally strong. The story goes she was brought to Prince Akbar, who then transferred her to Edgi Ganaba through a vassal named Chelohua. On Ganaba's land is where Zana would spend out the rest of her days. She was kept in an enclosure reportedly for the first few years because she behaved so wildly that people didn't want to go near her. And during this time, she reportedly dug a hole for herself in the ground to sleep in. When she became calmer, she was transferred to being held behind a wattle fence while tethered. People would throw things at and mock her, to which she would show her teeth and howl. Some people would try to get her to wear clothes, but she shredded them. She didn't wear clothes. On cool days, they would try to offer her a warm place to sleep, but she refused. But eventually she was given the liberty to wander about, but she never ventured too far away from the home. Clearly, Zana was different, but we've only scratched the surface of her story. She could reportedly outrun a horse, carry heavy things that even grown men would struggle with. She was fascinated by banging rocks together and would walk completely naked in winter. She reportedly never learned a single Abkhaz word, but she was only kept under control by Edgi Ganaba, who was clearly speaking Abkhaz, so it would seem that she understood Abkhaz, or she understood Ganaba. Who knows? Additionally, she apparently loved wine and was given her fill of it. And this is where the story takes an even more questionable turn. Zana had a baby, and then another one, and they were fathered by men in the village. However, the first two didn't survive. According to one source, this is because Zana, upon giving birth to them, immediately took the newborns to the cold river to bathe them. But the thought was that because they were half human, They weren't built to survive that, and thus they died. So the community elected to take away any future children from Zana to give them a chance to live. And thus the story goes like this. Zana had 4 children who survived, 2 boys and 2 girls, named Gomasa, Kojdanir, Janda, and Quit. And the youngest 2 were rumored to be fathered by Ganaba himself. And in fact, after his death, his wife raised them. However, reports passed down suggest that Quit was given the surname Savekia after a villager who was actually his father. Anyways, after about 20 years of living in this little village, Zana died, having not given off the appearance that she was getting older, and was buried in an unmarked grave in the family plot. She wasn't spoken of with sensationalism. That is, not until the story was recounted to researchers in the 20th century, including Dr. Boris Porshnev. Zana's story is quite controversial. There are many people who think she was violated and exploited. Some people believed and continue to believe that she was actually a relic hominid that inbred with humans. Due to this vigorous debate, studies were conducted on her purported remains and those of her son Quit. And although researchers reported abnormalities in the remains that were atypical of modern humans, their DNA returned with modern East and West African ancestry. The oral accounts that were reported included that the children of Zana were abnormally aggressive and strong. In one famous incident, Quit actually lost his hand in a fight with his relative, and honestly, I wonder what that fight was actually about. However, all of Zana's children went on to have families of their own, were fully absorbed into Abkhazian culture, and were pretty normal. And of all of Zana's children, Quit is the most documented and researched of them, having passed away in 1954. And his daughter, Raisa Kwitovna, was actually one of the people interviewed by researchers about her father and grandmother. There are a number of theories as to how Zana ended up in that forest in Abkhazia, and subsequent judgments that stem from them. For example, some believed that she was a victim of racism. The theory is that she was brought over as a slave during the Ottoman Empire and somehow became separated from other people, which led to her feral nature, having been separated from people and in a state of survival. And there was a story about a slave ship that had gone off course and had gone missing off the coast of Abkhazia, but it was never confirmed. But some people believe that this may have something to do with Zana. Another theory is that she was a part of the Afro-Abkhazian community that was already established at the time. However, there were no clear links discovered to actually confirm that she was connected to them. And moreover, a prevailing theory, which is considered more fact than theory, or spoken of as more fact than theory, is that she had a rare genetic disease known as congenital generalized hypertrichosis, or CGH. This is a rare genetic condition in which there is excessive hair growth over the body. And attached to this theory is that Zana had developmental delays, which led to her not speaking any understandable language and her behavior. Overall, much of her story is theory and speculation. The rise of cryptozoology in a more official way, so to speak, rose in the 1950s. So clearly, Zana's story was a big deal for these people at the time. And even to this day, people still argue about the existence of Bigfoot, Yeti, Almasty, etc. all around the world. But this wouldn't be the last reported sighting of a human-like creature in the Caucasus region. During World War II, a Soviet army detachment led by Lieutenant Vargan Karapetian allegedly reported having captured a wild man who was covered in hair and didn't speak any language. Unsure of what they were actually dealing with, they simply determined that he was a German spy, considering that there was a war going on at the times and the Germans had invaded the area, and they executed him as that. Now, I'll just insert this. I looked it up, but I couldn't find any record of that lieutenant having existed. But that's just from my own search. Zana's story is a cross between many controversial and thus sensitive topics. Different people will want different elements of this story to be true to fit their desired truth. But honestly, no one knows where Zana came from, nor what's out there beyond the eyes of man. How could we possibly make sense of the plethora of reports from around the world that all describe the same thing within the current accepted theory or idea or determination of the scientific community that these things simply just do not exist? There's so much about this world that we don't know than we do know. And this story is a reminder that uncertainty is just as much a part of the truth as certainty is. If you want to watch or read about my other video before about Merab Mendiashuli, the man who sang on fire, the Georgian hero, the Ossetian terrorist, you can watch that here. All right, peace.